Hey everybody, and welcome to the stream tonight. We actually have a really awesome guest, friend of mine for a long time, and published author abounding into different types of genres of writing, not only fiction, but also game writing. Mr. Rick Heinz, thank you for coming on tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh no, definitely. You've been doing a bit of a busy circuit with this stuff lately, haven't you? You've been doing podcasts and all kinds of stuff about your current endeavors.
Yes, the press junket is the real thing.
You were just currently working on the Red Opera, which is clarify for me, is that a campaign setting or is it an adventure? Like, what exactly is the Red Opera?
So the Red Opera, Last Days of the Warlock, is a full campaign, right? It's a 5th edition module campaign. But as we've hit our stretch goals, we're actually trying to make it like the definitive guide to Warlocks and a full-fledged campaign setting. So it started off as this symphony, music album kind of hybrid with a gaming product to tell a whole story and have music launch into it. But then
I don't do magic, Morty. I do science.
Going further,
One takes
further
brains, the other takes dark
keep trying
eyeliner.
to add more content to it, make it better.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for the cheer there, Thug. That being said, so you wrote this for 5th edition D&D.
Yep.
Now, I know I met you through World of Darkness role-playing and a lot of those types of games, and I know we've definitely share a love of L5R. You've been playing it far longer than I have, but that's also a very adored and beloved setting. What are your favorite settings to run in? Like, what do you like writing for?
So I actually like Deadlands is one of my favorite systems. It's an old system where you have the chips, the cards, you have the you toss bennies out when you get hit to avoid damage from your GM. But just I don't know. I like things that give you widgets to do. I also like Shadowrun a fair bit, and I mean obviously L5R and White Wolf are near and dear to the heart. But I think Savage Worlds, which is now the Deadlands, and Shadowrun are ones that I really enjoy writing for. But Dread is another game system I love writing horror modules for.
Really? Why is that?
So, okay, first off, nobody's writing Dread modules. They're just not, they're one-shot encounters that you're just meant to sit with your group of friends, put that Jenga tower in the middle of you, and tell a horror story, something like 10 Candles, right? But they're one-shot modules. There's not a lot of people that are writing content for it because, it's not where the market's at. It's a free system, so you kind of just get to write for your own amusement and your own fun. But that's a system that I really like it because the encounters and everything you do in that are driven towards immersion and horror and getting people to like jump while they're trying to be very sensitive around that Jenga tower so they don't knock it over and die.
Right. So that idea of definitely like a little bit of anxiety wrapped up with excitement and anticipation is what I enjoy the most about trying to design an encounter for a game, right? How can I manipulate the events leading up to this or during it that can get that buy-in essentially from the players at my table? What are some of your your most favorite ways to start crafting that buy-in either before an encounter or during it?
So before an encounter, it's all about those setting the 5 senses, right? It's just like any kind of storytelling, right? You want to make sure you're hitting on the sight, the smell, the taste, describing the acidic nature to the air of a black dragon that's in the woods, but building up that immersion before they get to the encounter is one way to really help build that anxiety. If you have a group of party members going through the frozen north on some dog sleds to go fight some aberrant horror trees, describing that loneliness as the canopy of trees gets thicker and you lose the night sky above you, and the crystalline on the snow with the occasional dripping of water. Those little bits of atmosphere, as they were, I find go a long way to adding that sense of horror and anxiety to a scene. And even if it's meant to be an exciting moment where you're ready to toss on your cell phone and play Ballad of a True Hero and slay a massive dragon or something,
right?
Even describing that dust cloud that comes when the dragon hits the ground is a part of making that encounter feel alive rather than just a box of hit points that you're gonna go stab with a bunch of swords.
Yeah, I definitely agree that a good thick description is really a good seller of this scene, and I definitely do like the idea of kind of building up before a tense encounter. But do you ever? So one thing I like to pull occasionally, and it's not for everybody. It's a really kind of just surprise encounter, essentially, like almost like a jump scare. Like everything's going fine, because I think sometimes players can sense when like they're about to get towards the bad guys, or like they're about to get to an encounter, because the way you build things up. Because sometimes a storyteller will start to ratchet up that tension, right before the encounter, like you're talking about, specifically to try to sell the encounter. Now, if it's a new encounter or something that wasn't planned on by the GM, or it's a surprise, for example, a new person walking into the game sometimes doesn't expect half the things their players do, right? Like if I were running for the first, and even to this day, I have to put it out there, I still get caught completely off guard by stuff my players do during a game. But if it's a new GM who's running it like a module, and they just started doing some things for the first time, and they have all their notes, they know like this is what's going to happen over here, and when they go here this is going to happen, but all of a sudden the players go fink off in some weird direction and spark an encounter. What are some tips you would give them to build up, like to make that counter, one, memorable, and two, feel that lived-in connection without being able to build up beforehand?
So there's this great thing you can do with your bad guys being surprised. And I say this as if you're a storyteller and you've already planned your encounter, or you have your narrative book that's told you, hey, you're supposed to have this encounter here and this encounter here. You're going to try to build that encounter up, but your players are coming in and they may zig, they may zag, they may decide to go investigate a different part. You can't control what they're going to do.
Right.
And a way to instantly make that encounter feel livable is to have like the guards caught with their pants down, literally. Like you can take an encounter that you had planned, the players are going in there and they open up a door to go do their investigation, or they're doing their search stuff, and you're in the middle of describing your narrative. But before you like go to the big room at the end of the hallway, you can open up one of the doors, and maybe the bad guys don't know that the party is there, and like they're in the middle of like having lunch, and there's a guy eating like a turkey leg and like sees this stuff. And then if you just take the same encounter, but then you set piece it, and you can't control what your players are going to do, but you can control your NPCs' reactions. And sometimes having your NPCs react in ways that don't make sense for them, to have terror, to freak out, to run. They flip a table and like dive out the window and like reach back, grab their turkey leg, and like go run into the other side to like start yelling at their boss. The moment you have your NPCs shift from their scripted environments, you've already taken the first step to making a dynamic encounter. Now, like we can get a lot into like the theory of what makes an overall encounter and what makes a dynamic encounter, and how you keep that set piece moving. And one of the themes I'll like try to hammer in during this interview is, for me, a dynamic encounter is largely a moving encounter. It is something that there's a story that is unfolding as the party is continuing their journey.
Right.
Whether they be, even if they're trying to defend an area, they may be running around inside an area that they're trying to defend, or like duck for cover in places. But if you're a new storyteller and you can't control what your players are going to do, have your NPCs react wildly off script by the players doing something random. Again, everybody does investigation, everybody's going to be looting, and sometimes you have party members that are uber cautious, right? We're talking about where the party members are like afraid that everything is a mimic. There's a trap door behind everything. Yeah. You're going to walk in little tiny, because they're already nervous. So sometimes just having like, one like monster just like randomly on patrol or going out to the bathroom off to the side, can cut the tension, but instantly forces the people to now start having to be involved in that encounter in an unexpected side way. And all of your work as a storyteller isn't gone then. You still have the same stats, you still have this bit, but then it becomes fun. And you can still lead up to that, oh shit, we finally got to the big boss moment. It could be hilarious, it could be climactic, it could be horror-filled, it can be whatever mood that you want to still set when that happens. But I think that for me, it's having my NPCs react, whether it be monsters, inanimate objects, even just trap-filled encounters. Sometimes a gear springs and it just goes wrong, and the pendulum collapses to the floor and it clatters with a bunch of noise. Just doing something like that to change what's there and get the ball rolling. So once that ball starts rolling, you have dominoes.
Right. There's something you touched on a few minutes ago that I think is really valuable. Ironically, I just recorded a video yesterday. All of October, I'm doing like ST videos based around horror themes, right? And one of the things I really talked about is managing tension around a table for a horror game, because it's very, very important. And you mentioned like being able to cut tension with the way that you approach an encounter from your side to change the way that the players view it, or maybe the mood around the table. And I think that's something that gets lost sometimes, is that encounters aren't always physical. It's not always a beat up the bad guy. An encounter could be a social confrontation or a mental puzzle that pops up. And those are definitely ways to manage tension around the table. And I think what gets lost sometimes is the ability to use an encounter to inject humor into a game. And you really, really hit on that very well when you're like, yeah, if the guy got his comeback for his turkey leg, you scared the heck out of him, and they're just completely unprepared for PCs. And I think that can give this, like, it can ground a game really well into, ironically, like a sense of like realism in terms of reactions, because not every NPC is going to be on top of their game. I'm the baller, guard, of the century for the big bad guy. And it kind of lets the players see a more human aspect of a NPC they can relate to right off the bat. Like, oh my God, I got caught eating lunch. This is crazy. And what's funny about that is it brings humor into a scene. It reduces tension. It kind of alleviates a little bit of dread, a little bit of hopelessness, and injects some lightheartedness into a scene that just happens to be instigating a combat, which I think is this awesome dichotomy that you can play off of, this weird polar opposites in one scene that, when done well, really kind of help, like you're saying, move a story along in directions. And I think encounter design, one thing I enjoy doing is making encounters that can help forge the mood and ambiance of what I'm going for either an upcoming encounter that's coming later on, or overall world. That's just my take on it. So I think that ability to cut tension and build tension is great with encounters.
Because it also opens up, obviously that encounter I described with reaching back for the turkey leg, that was meant to be a physical encounter, right?
Right.
But now that that this dude might just be freaking hungry, opens up the potential for like a social encounter or other things. You might have, because you've humanized him, or you might have a relationship, you might find him funny, you might take pity on him, you might take that guy prisoner, which opens up the option now in this encounter. It didn't have to be physical. Do you capture him? Do you interrogate him?
Right.
There's other avenues that can come from that. It'd be surprising, or it's been surprising to watch players' reactions when they will kill a group of guards, or they'll ambush somebody in a back alleyway and they find that like the guy was carrying a love letter, or little bits that were there that add an extra element of minuscule story. The players may never even care about it. It could just be a rock with a heart that just says like M and M plus M plus J, and
right.
Maybe all of a sudden now you have a group of people that are going to go try to find this lover of this guy that they just murder hoboed, or wonder or worry that this person may come back to haunt them later on down the line.
Right.
And that again also kind of takes dynamic encounters in, it creates a flow to keep the encounter moving, even when you've transitioned from a physical encounter into maybe a social one or a moral consequence one. So it gives you those options, but humor, you need humor in horror games, or in like, it's so, the one thing I think I see a lot of that kind of frustrates me, and I really want to get this message out there. Your players don't have to be challenged all of the time. It is thoroughly acceptable to sometimes let your players go back to a home village or go back to a place where they were, just to see how far they've progressed and get a chance to use their abilities, shine for a bit, and be total badasses. And maybe they'll find that they are going a little bit overkill, and start pulling their punches or start having more awareness of how strong they are, because that also grounds them to their place in the world.
Yeah, and I think that type of thing can also be used as to reassure players, give them a little more of a confidence boost. You can see this journey you've progressed on. You can see, like, you're no longer where you were at the start of things. Oh, Russ, thank you so much for the sub, man. That's awesome. I really appreciate it. Oh, by the way, for chat, if you guys have any questions you want to toss at us, feel free, and we'll definitely field those things. We'll kick them around and see what we can come up with. But I do have one that I find is, for me, oddly contentious of a question, because you usually get really, really polarized views. Is it okay to cheat on dice rolls during an encounter if you're the storyteller?
Oh, absolutely. And so I will do one of two things, right? It depends on when your encounter is, or why you're doing it, or what the purpose of that story is. As far as I'm concerned, the reason the storyteller screen exists is so you can fudge dice, right? If you're in the middle of a game and you're telling a story, and somebody, especially in some game systems, Dungeons and Dragons is incredibly swingy, right? It's not like some other game systems that are a little bit more well balanced. And frankly, you live or die by crits in that system. And if you're just in a minor encounter and you're doing that brevity moment, botches can be fun. But if like the damage dice are gonna like off your party member after you just had this big encounter and it's not really there for the story, you can go ahead and you can botch that dice. By the same token, though, if we're in a big boss fight and there's like that dragon is there and they're down with their legendary saving throws, they're completely topped off, and the party is really engaged, I will take the dice, I will remove my GM screen, and if the party has one spell left and it's that last moment and they give their big shot, I will grab that dice and I will roll it openly on the table. And I find that the ability to switch between when I'm rolling behind the screen to actually rolling in front of people creates sort of like an out of game tension or tension relief, because then they could see right there. And it's, for me, it's been notorious. Every time I've done that, my big boss usually ends up critically failing the horrible saving throw, and I'm like, well,
see,
I guess it's a stone statue now. And
given how you roll sometimes in our Roll20 games, that surprises me, because you roll hot fire a lot.
Oh yeah, I will roll 20s, but then when it's the freaking critical saving throw, and I'm done with that, it's always a one. It's happened like 3 times to me in my D&D for Kids groups.
Right.
But for them, when I have a bunch of kids at the table and I'm doing some behind the scenes, I really am not going to nuke, an 11-year-old who critically botched on, several checks, and they've gone through some grind encounters or something like that. And, it's just not the time. It's not story appropriate, right? But there are other times where, yes, okay, you got to let the dice where they fall. And if you're running a game and you need to know, hey, when is that moment? That moment is when the story will progress if the players lose or if the players win, right? If, there's something that's going to happen, like, God, I hate the idea that people use, they gate perception checks behind, or investigation checks. They gate storyline behind those checks, where an adventure will come to a grinding halt if you do not succeed on this one check.
Yeah.
If that's the case, don't ask for the check. Give them the information and use the check to give them extra information. Give them at least the minimum.
Right. And I really strongly believe that too. I don't think there should be any storyteller progression or story progression at all unless you bottleneck it behind like a single perception check or a single investigation check or, a lore check, for example. Now you can't progress until you figure out or re-roll and get it correct. That always bothered me. And I talked about that in one of the videos. I can't remember which one it was. One of the ones we did on the channel, but regardless, the point was give yourself wiggle room, right? Don't let all your plans hinge on one encounter for the story or one player for the story or one check for the story. Have it be malleable so you can always move the story forward. I think that doing this like hammered home. It's just one skill. If you fail, like we can't move any forward anymore. That's kind of boring, and it punishes the players for the luck of the die. You know what I mean? I think at that point it becomes an issue of like, let's find new alternative ways to either give this information via exposition or other side scenes that they can investigate and get around this like bottleneck of a check, because I don't think that's fair. I think that a story should have multiple avenues which can allow it to progress, and it shouldn't just be down to one thing. Because yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and by the way, that's when you have your game structured that way, it's a good example of why you don't need to then fudge dice, because the story is going to move whether or not somebody succeeds or not. Like you're running an L5R game, right? And when you're running online and you're using Roll20 or online digital platforms, the dice are usually public for everybody to see, and so it's very hard to have your suspense dice behind a screen.
Mm-hmm.
But in those systems, it's real important that you have it set up where it's like, all right, even if something bad goes south here, that's actually going to create more story and more opportunities just as much if they had succeeded.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, I tend to fudge rolls in combat, because I use combat as like a barometer control, essentially, where I can add pressure or take it away as needed. I feel that if the players are just trouncing, like, let's say it's a major encounter, right? Minor encounters like a guard or like a patrol, usually not a big deal. But if you're looking at like to build suspenses during an encounter, or to build this idea of like, wow, we need to go and get some expertise or an item that we need to kind of do this thing, you need to have that ability to kind of stretch out the encounter. And it doesn't necessarily have to be by adding in a bunch of ads, like a bunch of like nondescript NPCs, but it should be to showcase either that this NPC is a little hardier than usual, or is a little like easier to hit than usual, or does more damage. And I think at those stages where I would kind of like do the dice rolls, because I think that any major encounter that we've classified as like a pinnacle point should be taxing. And likewise, if a player is going to die during the game, this is just an opinion on my end, so chat beware, I don't think player death should occur unless there's a story reason for it, or it's dramatically appropriate at the time. And if a character receives enough damage to kill them, or outright, or to pass them through their thresholds and get them past that story to kill them, etc., at that point is when I'd scale back the dice. Oh man, I rolled a couple ones. I can't believe that. And you make a big deal about it, and then the player goes, whew, oh, breath of fresh air, and they pull them back, and you're like, aha, just as planned. But that tension's there, and now they take the threat more seriously. And like you're saying, these online platforms make that much harder to do so.
So if you are running online platforms, there is one little cheat that was taught to me. You can increase hit points behind the scenes without ever having to mess with your dice. And there's always special abilities, especially if somebody has spellcasters around. It doesn't matter what freaking game system you're running, right? Even Vampire the Masquerade has, thaumaturgies or other effects that people could have had. You can, if you have a major dynamic encounter that has been planned, you can find ways to do that barometer tension if you can't fudge your dice.
Right.
But you don't want to fall into the trap of just sort of Deus Exing the encounter either, though.
Yeah.
And that's another real thing. I mean, Legend of the Five Rings has this merit called Great Destiny, which was when you die, or when any character dies, they come back to life with one hit point, and they're somehow magically going to survive the encounter, even if you've moved beyond them, because they have a great destiny. The story's not done with them. There's this merit has been reflected in a few other game systems, and it got to the point in one of these very long running games that the players got so frustrated with this merit in the hands of major NPCs that they literally invented a Void Shugenja like ability to counter Great Destiny, because they were sick and tired of having every NPC get away with one hit point. At this point, they started going to like Maho to steal souls, and it was like a whole thing that happened because the storyteller, everybody had Great Destiny. So if you are going to use a trick once, do not use it every time down the line. You can use it to bail yourself out of one encounter, but don't repeat that. You have to you have to change it a bit.
Everything in moderation, right?
Right.
So we got a question here from chat. Actually, it's more of a general question, but I think it's actually a really good one because I've run across this question myself. So I'm curious how you view this. So Russ has asked, how long do you allow your players to chase a red herring before hinting that they went the wrong way?
Ooh. Well, first off, red herrings should still have a purpose. I actually don't agree with the idea that you like Shadowrun is really big in red herrings, right? You're gonna run Johnson missions and you're gonna go do something, and you have people have multiple avenues of investigation to get into the office building to deliver the pineapple to the CEO that's gonna blow up or whatever the case may be. You know, so you in a game where you're gonna use red herrings, I say you let them take it all the way to the end, and then you make that completely part of the story. You delivered a pineapple to a CEO that was like 3 buildings down the line, wasn't even the right guy. You thought you succeeded. You get back to your Johnson contact, and your Johnson's like, okay, so you literally just blew up like the wrong guy. You blew up the client,
We
right?
said
Like,
Renraku, not as technology.
right. You know, you let it go all of the way, but you keep and this is where you can add that humor into it, right? You keep getting more absurd with the hints. Maybe about a quarter of the way through, halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, and if they're still all committed, at that point, it's ride or die, bitches. All right, you're going all the way.
Yeah, yeah. This one
And
has. Go ahead.
Oh, and the other side of that coin is this one happens, and I get this question a lot, is you have an entire plot line that you've crafted, this whole storyline that is magnificent and beautiful over here in the distance, and your players have found a shiny rock by the side of the road.
Has
and are gonna go
nothing to do with it.
The thing is that all of this you should have never actually written. You should have maybe written some skeleton notes and some trees and some little bits here, and then just kind of had it there, and you flesh it out a little bit closer as your players get there, because you want to take the actions that your players have last done to have their consequences matter in the world before you develop. Like, even I am guilty, and Ray will fully acknowledge this, I am 100% guilty of like trying to be like, in my character's arc, I want to do this great grand long-term planned thing, even though realistically everything could change in the next game session.
Yeah,
right. And
I think
you know,
those.
I
Jinx,
was gonna say,
go ahead.
it's fun to dream, but you know,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, I think in those portions, and to address Russ's question a little more specifically from my end, I'm really in line with Rick on that one, actually. I think that red herrings, you can drop all the hints you want, but you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You know what I mean? And if you throw down those hints and those subtle ideas like, hey guys, this might be the wrong thing, or like, hey, you sure you got that address right? Or, you know, is it a pineapple? Did we double check? You know, like, you drop the hints with NPCs, and if they still want to listen, just let them go. But there comes a point where you're like, all right, we've gone so far afield that the consequences of this can be very dire. Let's check in with the players and see what their goals are. And I'm always a fan of that, because I'm like, all right, guys, where do you see this going? Where do you want to go with this? Oh, we're taking the pineapple to this guy, the CEO, because that's what we're told to do. If that's the answer you get, okay, cool. Let's run with it, I guess, you know. But it's like, oh, I wasn't sure because, you know, was it this that we got told? Because sometimes players will have questions that they just don't ask because they don't want to feel like they didn't get something, or they don't want to admit it, you know. But you'll find out when you check in with your players, I wasn't sure about that because I wanted to make this roll, but I wasn't sure it was appropriate. And then you can go, aha, yes it is, or no it isn't. Go ahead and make that roll, you know, and we'll see what you come up with for that scenario. And then they had this little funny aside where they're doing all this stuff and they're like, oh crap, we got the wrong address. We have 2 days before we get this in. We got to somehow get in with this other business, you know. And it can actually kind of shift things really kind of, you know, humorously and get them back on the right track. But I think that red herrings should really kind of stay as something the players can pursue, as long as they didn't misconstrue something like that was like obvious, right? That's why I asked those questions, like, you know, what's the aim here? What do you guys want to do? Okay, cool, awesome. And if they don't ask any additional questions, let's just run with it and let's see what happens. Because ultimately, it's kind of like that shiny object you're talking about. They pursue that and they find a love note, like, oh my god, what's this? Let's make that its own plot. Why not? You know. Because those types of things, I think, drive player like buy it. They get more excited, like, okay, we found a thing. What can we go explore? Oh,
And all that stuff that you have back there that you've already written, the players don't know that you've written it. So you can actually take it and then scoot it back around on the other side of that red herring. So your work isn't lost. You just change some elements around.
right.
And they can go that way too.
Yeah. Let's see. We got a question from Jeff. How do you handle an unplanned alignment? We've gotten a bit onto general storytelling. How do you handle an unplanned alignment turn that happened unexpectedly but legit? Why are you guys asking me questions about L5R? Like, I'm feeling called out here.
All right. So I'm going to take it into a cyberpunk way, though.
Okay.
All right. So I'm not even going to go L5R. All right. So I was running this cyberpunk game. And if anyone's ever played City of Heroes, there was this gang that was in City of Heroes called the Freak Legion. There were a bunch of people that chopped off their hands and they like attached like crazy like blades and chainsaws to them, and they were like juiced up and whatnot. But the leader of the Freak Show was like a former tax accountant who basically saw the glory of metal. And the players in Cyberpunk were, there to go help the cops deal with these street gangs. And they, blew up these freak show. They were dealing with all these like cybered up street gangs, and they were doing this for a while. And they get to the boss, and like two of the players are like, "Hey, wait a minute! This guy's actually really smart. He's an accountant. He's got a whole business here. Why don't we just take all this loot, work with them, sell it back to the corporations, get the insurance money on the back end? Then we're going to buy stock in the company, and make money up this way." And the game very quickly turned into a game of cops and first robbers, and this fun pulpy cyberpunk game, to the most bookkeeping white collar crime game that I've ever actually run. And the players shifted entirely to this. Like, they were coming, they had like one guy actually started coming to game, and he would sit with the little green accountant advisor, and he brought his accountant's calculator as they were calculating their investments. And obviously this wasn't even thematically close to the game that I wanted to run. I wanted to play with, Freak Legion, metal, cybernetic people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so far off kilter, I had to sit back and go, okay, guys, wait a minute. Is this the game that we're really running? Are we going in this direction? And if it happens in the middle of game session, you get up, you go to the bathroom, you go for a smoke break, because you can always walk away mid-scene. And you can take a moment to recompose yourself and figure out, okay, this is what happened. How's the world going to react? How's this NPC going to react? All right, now we're going in this direction. Okay, then we're going to go this way. You remove yourself, you take a quick pause, you don't react, and you check in mentally with your own characters, because everybody who's a writer or storyteller is actually a little bit insane anyway. Our characters live in our own freaking brains and do their own things. Like, I got mad when one of my characters in my own book killed himself, and I was like, dude, what the fuck? I'm the writer, what the hell? And so you check in with them and be like, hey, this guy just did this thing, are you okay with that? And you're like talking to yourself in the bathroom, right, while your players are outside at the freaking table. Or if I had enough time to plan, I'll be like, okay, we're going in a different direction. How does the world look? And I will often time skip, maybe sometimes even a month or 2 months after the players make a drastic alignment shift, especially if I want to get to the part of the story which is grounded to them, which is their consequences, good or bad consequences are not bad. They are story. You can have good consequences, bad consequences, but either way, the meat of that story is what happens from them doing that. What did they gain? What did they learn? What allies do they have now? And what did they lose?
Mm-hmm. So for me, if something switches all of a sudden, it really depends. So sometimes you'll find that those alignment shifts happen that look like they're for legit reasons were because I want the special toy box, and I can only get it if I go this way. So in those cases, I'll just ask a couple questions. Hey, I see you're doing this type of stuff with your character. What's up? How's he, let me check with the character. What's going on with their character? And kind of, double checking, crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, essentially. And then it becomes what type of game were we out to run? What will this turn the game into? Because if it's just one PC that suddenly just takes a left turn in Albuquerque and goes completely off the rails, and becomes like, say, from we're all playing noble characters and we're all lawful good or chaotic good, and somebody just went, blue, chaotic evil, that can affect table dynamic real bad. Because if the game that we all signed up to play, for example, was like we're all playing good guys and heroes, and all of a sudden one player goes completely off the rails bad guy and starts just murdering people or sacrificing people.
That's a bit different when you get one person who's in a line shift.
When it's one person, it's time for a chat, because maybe it's time for that character story to go somewhere else away from the main party, and maybe they should make a new character. But if it's the whole group shifting, then that's a dynamic we need to take a second back to kind of explore, because I'm a big fan of, hey, we're at a good time, let's take a 5-minute break, everybody grab a bite to eat, go to the bathroom, blah blah, and then like Rick is saying, take a step back. All right, real quick, what's going on now? This can seem really daunting for somebody who's brand new to storytelling, but your improv game will get stronger as you go on. You will improve with how you can handle these things. And sometimes, actually a lot of time, players will take you into areas that you do not see coming at all. So you're always going to be a little bit on your toes.
There's a great tip for new storytellers learning to up their improv game. And that is, at the end of every game session, sit on down and write yourself session outro notes of what happened. Mm-hmm. You'd be surprised, like that little tip of sitting down and be like, this is what happened in the game session. And then when you craft your next adventure, look back at what the players had done on the last one. That, like, actually the reason why is there's some brain science behind it. When you actually write something down, you jog your memory in different ways, and you imprint certain things back onto yourself, rather than just trying to remember, I remember what happened last game session. It's like, what did you eat last Tuesday? You remember some important parts, but when you sit on down and actually write the little notes, if you want to up your improv game to do exactly that, so you know how to do that walk away, jotting down after session notes in your own brain ramble that nobody else is going to read is a real big help.
Yeah, and that's one thing we talked about in the channel a bit, is the idea of taking notes about what players do, because not only can it help you adjust in situations like this, like Rick is saying, but it also helps you make up other ways to buy player interaction into the game. Like, they met an NPC a while back, you named them, which will start kind of into a question I just got asked a second ago. You named an NPC, they ran into that guy, and now they come back to town when they're now these big awesome heroes, and that innkeep, his inn got burned down by bandits. Originally, it would be like, hey, yeah, you come back to town and inn's been burned down. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever. But then if you attach it to previous notes, oh, yeah, it's the guy who got you free drinks when you were here the first time, when you guys are starting out as adventurers, like you're level 3 and now you're level 15 coming back home. Yeah, his inn got burned down by these guys who've been marauding the countryside. And now they're like, wait, we know that guy. We're going to do something. It creates this like buy-in from players. And I think that note-taking helps you do that, because you know who they encountered and what they did in these certain areas. No matter how long it has been, you still have it in your notes. And the encoding process is very real. Writing down helps you encode the memory of what you did much better. It aids your brain in repracticing, rehearsing what the experience was. But the question I got asked was by Chris, was, do you keep a list of random NPC names, professions, or races to keep the story running and reduce slowing the game down when the group eventually takes a left turn and coming so close to a major plot, scene, or other encounter? I don't. I make them up on the fly. What about you, Rick?
I don't as well. I also make them up on the fly. I look at random objects around my room and, randomly grab names from them. I will, if I'm running at cons or I'm doing marathon storytelling, I will do the 7 dwarves method. Happy, grumpy, sleazy, Dowsy, grumpy, whatever the hell their 7 dwarf names are. I'll have them on my storyteller screen. And anytime anybody comes to an NPC, because we're all about dynamic encounter design in this, right? So any encounter, whether it be social, even going to the shopkeep, can be a dynamic encounter. And the way to do that is you have to add, I was going to touch on the 5 elements of a short story dynamic encounter, but you can just run your 2 fingers down the list and be like, oh, this shopkeeper is drowsy and grumpy. Okay, cool. Why is he drowsy and grumpy? Did he get hungover at the bar last night? Did he get broken up with before he's here selling to you guys? So I will do emotions are the only things I'll keep on my GM screen.
Fair enough. Yeah, I play it by ear for every scene, and where I think, at least for me, where I think it needs to go. So like, if the players just came off this horrible defeat and they're going to buy some new equipment, right? I'll try to put an opposing emotion into that scene by the shopkeep, to kind of like mellow it out. So the defeats, it's there, but it's the world continues moving on. Let's have you kind of get brought back to a little bit of a lighthearted mood, or likewise, if they just did some awesome thing, we need to remind them, if it's World of Darkness, for example, that the world's still crap and people are still having to deal with crap. So now you get the depressive bartender who doesn't give a crap of what you order. They're just going to slide shots down the bar. Oh, it's spilled? Cry me a river. I think that having encounters that, especially NPCs, that kind of counter some of the emotions in the players can make a more interesting thing, especially if they butt heads. Conflict and encounters is fun.
Conflict's a key, because when you get into it, to make any encounter dynamic, if you're going to set down and you're going to write a set piece encounter, there's 5 elements that you need, and funny enough, they're the same 5 elements that you need for telling a short story. So if you ever want to script out an encounter that is more than just a block of stats, like I have 4 goblins with sticks, right? That's a boring encounter. Your players are going to go, they're going to fight 4 goblins, they're going to have sticks, right? But you
never underestimate stick goblins, by the way.
Right, but you take 4 of the goblins and you throw them on a cart, right? And the cart is now moving, and your players are moving. Okay, you have an element. You're moving through your scenery. Now you're at least moving downwards. You still don't have all the elements for a dynamic encounter though, because there's no emotional tie. Hey, look, there's 5 goblins in a cart. Wave hi to them. Great. Why do you care? Now those goblins have a crate of TNT to them, and they're heading towards the PC's hometown. Okay, now we have to defend our town from these goblins that are racing down the road at this hometown that we want to defend and save. Okay, you want to add even a little bit more surprise into it. One of the goblins speaks common and is able to like shout back and forth to you and is like taunting you. And one of the other character's little sisters walks into the middle of the road as the cigarette black moment. You see, all short stories have a black moment, which is that moment where you're outside, the character takes their cigarette, they look around and just go, fuck, because it's the time when it's the time when everything goes wrong for the private detective. You can find it in every major medium. A lot of episodic TV shows have this like thing, something clearly goes wrong midway through the episode. There's always some aspect of a black moment where that characters and the people realize that the world has taken them for a spin and they are now along for the ride, and they have to take action. Otherwise, the world is going to hit them, and their little sister is going to be run over by a cart of goblins with TNT in it. Now, you still have 4 or 5 goblins in a cart with sticks. It's the same challenge rating encounter, right? It's the same stat block difficulty for the characters, but now there's extra elements that make that story piece central. That the characters are going to have a feeling for it. They're going to have their black moment when they see the little sister cross the road. They're going to have that sense of panic, and when they defeat it, they're going to have a little bit of heroism or rise to it, and like they might take more bold risks. They might do something more heroic. They're going to be more engaged as party members, leaping from one cart to the next. Choking out the head goblin who they can talk to.
Right. It's like the three act story arc in Microcosm. That black one is like the twist, essentially,
right.
to kind of bring them down so they have to rise to the occasion type situation.
Yep. And so you should always, when you're planning your encounters, it should never be, here's a dragon in the room or 4 Brewhob shovels waiting outside the prince's chamber.
I feel
you gotta
called
have
out.
Your hook. You gotta have no, if you were called out, that would have been 4 freaking Bali, all right? Yeah, you got to have your hook moment. You got to have you have your hook moment. You have the scenery, the movement, right? And the scenery should always be moving in some capacity, right? And fights in single rooms are boring. And if you are in a single room encounter, have something cool happening in the room. Cherry blossom petals falling, from trees, moonlight cascading down, something to set that setting. Then you have your black moment, and then you have, characters taking action or not. And then you have your resolution.
Yeah. And that's always fun to kind of see how different storytellers and GMs put those things together. I tend to really flavor the encounter based on what the impetus was going into it. Because a lot of times now, where a lot of games I run, if it's a pre-set up counter, I'll still kind of scale it to where the PCs are. But if it's something that just arises, I'll put in there whatever is necessary for the moment to get a point across for whatever the scene was supposed to be. And what I think is interesting about that is a lot of newer DMs and storytellers and narrators, whatever you want to call it for the system in question, you kind of feel constrained if you're running modules at first. The module says that these things are here and here's why they're here. Don't ever be afraid to put your own spin on it. That's an important part of really starting to take material that you're playing with and making it your own. I talked about modules in one of a recent video where we were talking about using the modules as a framework and building around that framework to make it something original, something that's new, something that's kind of fresh and can be fun to run for you, even if it's not usually your type of thing to run. Like, I tend to not like modules a lot. I feel they're very constrained. I feel they're very like a straitjacket. So for that reason, I tend to really write around the module a great deal. And I think that newer DMs, running modules is a great way to start, but start adding your own meat to that framework. Use some of these elements, use some of these things, to get player buy-in, to get this like impetus for action, to get a moment of, oh my God, that subtle doubt of like, can we actually do this? This is really important. Like, are we able to do it? And then let them rise and come to be the hero of the scene and of the moment. But don't be afraid to take those basic encounters from modules or even ones you've written from what you had them planned out to be and make them something new, depending on the demands of the moment.
If you're gonna write a whole campaign, if you ignore writing the rest of the campaign and you're gonna run any module or even write your own world, if you spend all of your time crafting that first encounter that players in make, and you make that encounter as awesome as they're going to be, you're going to set yourself up with your own sandbox storyline. Even the 4 goblins with sticks racing down towards the village, what happens when you get in there? At that point, you can start doing what you do, Ray, which is just, I'm going to react to what my players are doing and put an encounter in to tell and set the scene, because the players are going to have enough story hooks to then start exploring in the world. So I don't think there's a single Dungeons & Dragons campaign book that's out there that I haven't redone the opening encounter for, strictly to create those elements. And then this way they kind of, I'm running the D&D for kids groups and like they're going through Out of the Abyss right now. All right, they're still going through, but they're going through for their own reasons. There's different things that play, things that were born from play from the very first escape from Drow prison. Yeah,
and you get, once you start doing that, I think you get a lot more interesting buy-in from your players. A lot more strong buy-in too, because they have now personal reasons as their characters to see the resolution of whatever the issue, whatever the call to action was. They now want to resolve it for their own reasons, as a character, which is a lot more powerful than like, I got hired by a nobleman in Waterdeep to kill some goblins who just happen to have sticks and they're in a cart. Yeah, who knew? So if you start building that personal impetus for action, that call to action becomes more powerful and really kind of draws the players in. And I think you can do that with almost any encounter. Some encounters, random encounters, I'm not a fan of random encounters. Like random encounter charts and stuff in modules, they're not my bag, because I feel that at that point, I can roll some dice and see what possibly is there, but it's a counter that I didn't plan on, that has no purpose right now in my story, so I'm not as likely to put them in, unless it's something where the players just went off the wall, like, we're gonna hunt Maho users now, like, well, all right, let's look up some Maho users, but...
So, it's funny, I actually have come to love random encounters recently, and it was Storyteller for kids that taught me this, because, and it depends entirely on your audience, right? I guess in this case, you would probably grow to love them too if you were running for the same tables that I have. A lot of what the kids want to do is they want to go explore, and they want to go out to this area to, in their storyline, they have to go out and, acquire a chef or learn somebody. They're basically playing Suikoden, the D&D game where they go out and they recruit and they bring people back home. Because what they're secretly doing is they're secretly building their own campaign world, right? Is so they have their own little sandbox to often be storytellers for. But random encounters when they go out to the Feywild or they're out in the Underdark or whatnot. They like seeing kids read the monsters manual all of the time. They like to know about that stuff, and sometimes just tossing random encounters their way, especially when you're running in like short 2-hour blocks, or you're doing like sometimes like a big con circuit, because there's other types of storytelling more than just the home game.
Right.
And for those random charts really do add some fun to it. And even as a GM, it can be kind of fun after a while to be like, oh, okay, cool, we got a gelatinous cube out in the forest. All right, let's tell this story. I guess he was eating a boar and his eyeballs are wibbling as he comes close to you. But they don't have to beat it, they don't have to kill it. Sometimes they just see it. I use random encounters in a few settings. Legend of the Five Rings had some freaking hilarious random encounters in a chart in one of their books, where you could get like a Phoenix samurai in a tea house just quietly sipping tea while he's on fire, and it's like, why is that guy on fire, right? Why is he there? And that's the thing. And so sometimes, particularly when you're having those like a brevity downtime sessions, or it's just like, hey guys, okay, we're gonna do some leveling up, we're gonna play for a little bit. I think that in those sessions, random encounters can give everybody a break, including the storytellers, so that it's not always just hey, everything is like a sculpted or a planned or a reactionary encounter that's gonna have story meaning. Sometimes it's just, hey, we're having fun at the table together. And I think that's why I fell in love with random encounters as here's your story arc, here's your big dynamic encounters, and then here's a break. We're all going to have a little bit of fun. You find a badger in the middle of the road. That thing will fuck you up. Do not engage the badger. Run from the badger. But
fair enough. It's kind of like a storyteller break. For me, though, like, usually a lot of the groups I run for are very, very, like, dedicated, like, purpose-driven, and they know where they want to go. They know where they're going to be. They know exactly what they're going to do. I'm like, all right, well, we could throw some random stuff in there, but it really, when you start looking at like the scale, like here's what we have to get done, I'm like, do I have time for a random encounter? And so for me, that's one of the big drawbacks. Like, I don't know if I have time to get to the things I want to get to, this storyline, at least this session, and still do random encounters. But I can see like the release valve, essentially is what you're saying. An encounter like that.
And the way I look at it in the sandbox world is, if the players are getting hit with random encounters, so are the freaking NPCs. So as far as I'm concerned, the storyline takes a pause. Somebody finds a badger in the road, somebody finds a samurai that's on fire in a tea house, and they're like, all right, we gotta look at this.
And then they'll talk about it when they meet up for their encounter. Hey, did you kill that badger that I saw? Yeah, I did. You won't believe the samurai I saw, though. It's crazy. But I completely lost my train of thought thinking about two groups of samurai encountering each other in the road, one having seen a Phoenix samurai on fire in a tea house, and the other one just killing random badgers. Like, what game is this? But Rick, like I said at the beginning of this, you're on to a lot of stuff right now. You're doing this podcast streak. You're doing basically this press tour. What's this all about? What's going on? Give us a few minutes here to tell us what's going on with you.
So I got 6 days left on this big Red Opera Kickstarter, and it's awesome. Just go to the redopera.com, just check out the Kickstarter page. It is symphonic metal and a full instrumental orchestra that we had done by the Budapest Scoring Symphonic Orchestra and the Heavy Metal Hall of Fame, worked and woven into a 5th edition campaign, kind of actually taking a lot of these dynamic encounter elements that we were talking about to make sure that there's these plot beats that a storyteller could reference, with side quests kind of branching off to allow the players to explore, do their things, make choices, and also allow that break. Kind of actually taking all this advice and all the stuff that we talked about into actual form. So it's not written like your typical D&D module. It's written almost like if you were going to play more of a vampire or an L5R game in a D&D campaign setting.
Is the setup kind of like Curse of Strahd then, where it's like kind of like where the players decide, oh, that's awesome. For those in chat, I'm going to put the link in chat, and for those watching YouTube, the link is in the description down below. Check it out.
there's that, and then my first book got published. It's The Seventh Age Dawn, sarcastic urban fantasy about the end of the world.
How is it
And
sarcastic?
How is it sarcastic?
How is it sarcastic? I saw that earlier too. I'm like,
All right.
how is it sarcastic? Because I got my
How
copy.
is it sarcastic?
I haven't started reading it yet, though. So
Okay. So, I mean, it follows an ironworker in Chicago who basically gets roped into this conspiracy of people that have kept magic. The Illuminati, the Masons, and all these other secret societies have had magic forever, right? And what happens when a group of anarchists decide to level the playing field and give that shit to everybody in the world? You can cure cancer or become immortal. All you have to do, Ray, is summon up a demon, kill it, and eat its heart. And nothing can possibly go wrong when the entire world tries this.
Right.
Nothing can go wrong at all. And
this sounds like the thing the Technocracy always warned us about, Rick.
right. I mean, it might have some inspirations there. But and then the sequel is what happens when magic returns and companies brand it. And then I got picked up for the publishing, and I got picked up for my sequel. So I'm really, really happy about that. Seventh Age Dystopia is already written. It should be out early next year. I cannot wait for my sequel to come out because I've done so much writing since I started this whole process 5 years ago that I know that I've improved in what I've been doing, and I can't wait to get my sequel out there.
Now, I saw that the Seventh Age that Dawn was just put out as like you just found a new publisher, but it was already previously published, right?
It was. It had
process.
won. It had won that contest for best science fiction fantasy that everybody had to kind of vote and pick the top 5 books with the Nerdist, and that's how I got started with Nerdist and Geek Sundry was that contest. But the contest was for one book. Right. And so you did your one book, that was it. And the problem is in the publishing industry, if your first book is already published by somebody, it's really hard to get that republished unless you manage to, make it certain far, hit certain sales thresholds, because it is business, right? Publishers don't want to take the risk. They don't want to publish a sequel if the rights are owned by somebody else. And the terms of my contract came to an end, and the other publisher was waiting for me to have my rights back, and he was like, "Good, I want your next 3 books."
That's awesome.
I already have the drafts, and so Prince of Cats Literary Productions, he picked me up right away, and yeah.
That's pretty cool. And so now we have your at Crankybolt. Is that your Twitter as well as everything else, or?
That's Twitter, Facebook, Twitter, League of Legends. I play a lot of Teamfight Tactics when I'm trying to veg out. Discord, I'm even Crankybolt on Discord 4928 if you really need the numbers.
So if people follow you on Twitter, will they actually get some updates about when Dystopia is coming out and things like that and other fun stuff?
Yeah. Right. Basically, I use Twitter like most other writers. Hey, my new shit's out. Please go check it out. And occasionally, I will reshare some Metal Cats of the Day, type stuff and some music.
Twitter is a great content creator outlet, in my opinion. But we did get a question about some of the Red Opera stuff. So Chris has asked, will you be making modules for other classes?
So this Kickstarter, because it has been successful, we have gotten the green light to start taking this experience, because the Red Opera isn't just for Warlocks, it's for everybody. It's just a campaign, but it will be primarily because around this world that Warlocks live in. And we got greenlit. We're going to end up doing one for possibly every other class, where we're going to tie in a full element of music, build a city, build a campaign around that idea. For like Rangers, we're going to do a thing where like the gods have put out a bounty call on like this one guy who really messed up, and like everybody who's got like one ranger in the party is like, okay guys, that god wants this guy dead. And it's going to be like a crazy chase scene across all the different planes as everybody's on a bounty hunt, very Smoking Gun style. We have like a rogue one where you start off like you don't have to play rogues, but it's like about trying to build your criminal enterprise up. And we're going to work possibly with the guy for V for Villains, that band.
Cool.
For that. I mean, everything we do with this studio is we're going to try to bring immersive story elements to the table. We're going to, always add music, or we're going to add some other element to allow the storyteller to up their game and give them something cool to bring people in. I know for certain, though, my next book that's being published is The Storyteller's Forge. The whole purpose of The Storyteller's Forge is to teach people how to become a storyteller, and get even kids into gaming and teach kids how to become storytellers. It's already written. I got the first draft done. I just got to go through and polish it. I got greenlit to start working on publishing that, and that will probably be about 2 years until it's done. But that process is starting. And Ray, I do believe I've asked you if you wanted to help contribute on the Storyteller's Forge.
Oh, I'm a terrible storyteller. You know that. I have trouble whipping 2 sentences together half the time because my players hate me.
Yeah, it's not like you don't write and crank out content like nobody's business.
Running 4 games and doing a YouTube channel. But no, I'd love to kind of take a look at some things. I actually, right now, something I've had in the back burner for the past 2 months is doing a storyteller's guide, like a primer for storytelling for Vampire the Masquerade in 5th edition. So that's been kind of just sitting in my notepad right now, or my Word documents, gathering dust as I've been writing for a bunch of other stuff and doing this other journey into content creation, which has been just wild. But I think we're going to wrap it at that. I'm going to get everything set up. Guys, thank you so much for coming out. We appreciate the questions. Rick, thank you so much for coming on, taking some time out of your busy, crazy time with the Red Opera to do this with me. Hopefully we'll have you back sometime. I think we're going to do some horror stuff in October.
Yes.
So that should be
2
good.
sentence horror stories.
Oh, that'd be a lot of fun. Next week, I think, is kind of up in the air right now. I think we're going to try to do some stuff about horror games to kick off, October proper. I know that all the videos on the YouTube channel are going to be now strictly based around horror games and Halloween. But speaking of that, we're going the odds path. You guys have fun, and thanks a lot for showing up.